guys, I'm Kristen. Welcome and welcome back. Today I wanted to share a few completed series that I think you should binge read next year. So I've been noticing lately in my own reading as well as chatting with other people that definitely since my time on BookTube in particular, but just in general in the past few years, I have been reading straight through series so much less frequently than I used to, when in the past, if I picked up a book and read it and I enjoyed it and the next book in that series was out, I would just keep reading on in that series. And I definitely now more have a tendency to, even though I love something and there's a sequel, I, for whatever reason, pick up other completely unrelated things. And it definitely has, to some extent, to do with being able to talk about a variety of things here on this channel. But I think in general, just like the always wanting to see something new, see something like what's next, try new things, new books that are coming out, I feel like binge reading straight through a series has become so less frequent. So today I'm going to recommend a few series that I personally really love, but don't get nearly enough opportunities or chances to talk about them here on the channel, that also happen to be completed series that you could potentially pick up and read all the way through next year. So first up is the one and only young adult fantasy book that I have on this list, and it is a series that I really do not talk about ever, even though I talk about the author Juliette Marillier fairly frequently. This is my favorite young adult work of Juliette Marillier, and that is the Shadowfell series. At the start of this book, we are following Naren, who lives in this kind of Scottish-inspired fantasy world where the king of the time is a particularly evil king who conscripts all magic users into his service, and if not, they are sort of rounded up and killed in an annual cull that takes place. Naren is traveling kind of on the run with her father, and she has a secret that can't get out, and that is that she has the ability to speak to the good folk. In fact, they tend to kind of seek her out. When Naren is separated from her father in this year's annual cull, she winds up seeking out Shadowfell, which is a whispered place of rebellion that she has heard about, and she is kind of taken in during this time by a dark, mysterious figure who is going to help her get there. It does read a little bit more towards the younger side of young adult, in just the naivety and sweetness. Juliette Marillier's main characters tend to be truly good people at heart, so definitely expect to find that kind of a feeling in the character of Naren and those surrounding her. The rebellion takes us to some interesting place over the course of this series as we, in a very tropey fashion, explore Naren's exploration and learning the different elements of her particular magic and how she can use that to the advantage of this rebellion. It is very tropey. It is very classic YA, but I will say that she does something with the romantic element in this series that I do really enjoy, and that is that it is not angsty love at first tension. It is a very bittersweet and tender romance, and then the amount of time that they do have each other is just all the more special because they are so often apart. So it does have that sort of traditional travel journey, learning about your magic, rebellion kind of elements to the story. But overall, I think it does a really good job at the end of this book of exploring the trauma that the people as part of the rebellion have dealt with and the things that they were made to do as part of this rebellion, or I guess confronting the choices and the actions that they did on behalf of the rebellion over the course of the time. That at the end of a conflict, things are not just happy-go-lucky in every element. People involved tend to need a lot of time and healing, and I think that it was really mature of this story to pay attention to that. So if you have not read any of Juliette Marillier's work in general, I do have a Where to Start with Juliette Marillier where I don't talk about the young adult books, in fact, so you can also check that video out to see if you like this author in general. And if you have already, her young adult Shadowfell series I do really enjoy. It is very cute, very sweet, and very bittersweet. Next up is a series that I typically think of as more new adult, and that series is the Swords and Fire series by Melissa Caruso. I personally think this is not a great title for the series at large, but the first book in this series is The Tethered Mage, and this is a completed trilogy. If you were to read the book synopsis, you're going to be mistakenly led to believe that this is a two-person POV book, and it is in fact not. We're following Lady Amalia, and she is the daughter of a very important noblewoman in a very Venetian-inspired empire. Those with magic have to be conscripted into service once more. I just did this one in the last one, but they are conscripted into service for the empire. They're not allowed to live free, and they are in fact like tethered or bound. In fact, they are tethered or bound to one individual who controls their ability to access their magic at any given time. Our main character, Amalia, accidentally binds herself to a mage who has been dodging conscription and living on the streets. Defying odds, these two do not become best friends, and I think that that is a way that our author, Melissa Crusoe, does a really great job of flipping some tropes on their heads or making some choices that are atypical for the setup that you think that you're reading. Over the course of this series, Amalia and Zyra get pulled into a lot of political maneuverings that are happening and tensions with other countries that are not part of the empire itself. Amalia is someone who is schooled in one of the types of magic that is more philosophical and knowledgeable. She can't actually go through with anything, but she has that theoretical foundation of understanding this magic. Her knowledge is what helps get her through a lot of the things and a lot of the situations that they have over the course of this book. Again, I feel like there was some elements of going a different direction in terms of the relationship that Zyra and Amalia have. You'd think these two bound people are either going to be sapphic lovers, they're not, or become BFFs by the end of the first book, and that's definitely not the case. So I thought that that decision to avoid that obvious route, or those two obvious routes of relationship between these two bound characters, was really atypical and great. I also think the author does some really interesting things on the romantic relationship that is in fact present over the course of this series. You're going to come to book 2 and think, oh no, this is where we're going. And honestly, she makes some really atypical, to say it again, choices over the course of this book, or over the course of this series, that I think were really great. I hope that you enjoy this series as well. It is really underhyped, and it has some really great overall value in both the writing, the storytelling, and the trope subversions or redirects that the author takes over the course of this series. So if you wind up reading this series or you have read it, let me know down in the comments down below. I would love to hear if you wind up reading the series or if this sounds up your alley. The next series that I'm going to recommend is an 8-book series, but it's a really easy to read 8-book series that you could totally read slowly over the course of next year. And that is the Invisible Library series by Genevieve Cogman. We are following our main character, Irene, who is definitely one of my favorite characters that I have read from in the past few years. She's very memorable, she's very badass, she's very smart and savvy, and she uses her intellect and her wit and just overall jack of all trades skill. She's a very capable person to do so much. But let me tell you more about the series itself. Irene is a junior librarian for the library, which is this endless, boundless library that exists within the metaphysical ethers of the world or universe. So this library, the job of this library, the role that this library has, is to hold all of the alternate universes stable and steady by collecting books, particularly unique books, from all of the different alternate worlds. At the start of the first book, Irene is given a new apprentice who has some particular features that make her question something about this particular person's identity, and she is sent on a mission with this new apprentice to collect a book, of course, where in this world she garners the attention of some nefarious locals within this world, as well as the library's enemy number 1, who is a past librarian who went rogue. These books are very readable, and I hesitate to use the word cozy, but I am going to use them in that they reminded me a little bit in the same quality of cozy murder mysteries. They're not the same exactly, but each of the books, because it is a set problem that Irene and her apprentice have to work through, she enlists the help of others. She has problems and situations that she needs to figure out and solve. The stakes do grow over the course of the series, where at first they feel a lot more like personal and smaller scale stakes, but there is like elements unfold and the world develops such that the stakes do rise over the course of this series. I think these are very bingeable books. I personally read the first 4 like back to back, and I did kind of burn out myself a little bit. So I would say like if you are gonna like binge, maybe only 2 at a time and take some breaks in between. I think 2 at a time would be a really, really good pacing of reading through this series in particular. There is a slow burn romance that takes place over the course of this series. And as I said, Irene herself is just like such a fun, badass character to read from in like a bookish badass kind of way. So I just think that it overall had some really unique elements as well as some like fun tropiness that we get to explore through the various worlds that Irene gets to travel through over the course of this series. I personally thought that the finale had such great impact in terms of some small subtle changes that were happening from book to book. They were almost so subtle you don't realize them until they're reflected upon in the final book. So I thought that that was absolutely genius mastery of plotting and planning and writing through this series. So if you haven't ever read The Invisible Library and you are looking for some like small, cozy, really enjoyable books to work your way through next year, perhaps like a really great palate cleanser in between big chunky books as you go through the course of next year, this is a series that you should check out. Next up is a duology that I don't really get a chance to talk about. In fact, I don't get a chance to talk about this author very often, and that's because I find his books somewhat difficult to recommend, and that is the Sarantine Mosaic duology by Guy Gabriel Kay. If you've been around the channel for a long time, you do know that I am a huge GGK fan, but again, I don't have a lot of opportunities to talk about his books. He tends to publish rather slowly, so he doesn't have new releases coming out all the time, and his works are very particular, and I think definitely more so tend to be books that you either love or really don't gel with at all. I have always planned to do a where you should start with Guy Gabriel Kay, but honestly, Jake Bishop has a really, really good one that I largely agree with everything that he says. So I'm going to redirect you to his channel for that. But perhaps it will be something that I work my way up to doing in the future again. But I have in fact read all of Guy Gabriel Kay's books and include some of them as some of my favorite books of all time. The Sarantine Mosaic duology I would absolutely include as some of my top 5 favorite books of all time. I am going to refer to them as like a single entity. This is definitely a duology that is like one big book. I think there is some climax towards the end of the first book, and there are in fact still new characters that are introduced in the second book, Lord of Emperors, but you really, really should read these 2 books as if it is like one big entity and with not too much time in between them. If you haven't read a Guy Gabriel Kay book before, this is not a terrible place to start. It's maybe not necessarily the first place I would recommend starting. Tigana also is not the place you should start with Guy Gabriel Kay, so don't read Tigana first. But if this did happen to be your entry into Guy Gabriel Kay, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world either. This book is set in a sort of alternate history Byzantine Empire. Because he makes it alternate history, it allows him to make some changes that are not completely historically accurate, as well as include magical elements. And the way that he includes magic is essentially creating whatever like beliefs there were, like whatever mythological beliefs there were at the time, and he makes those elements real. In this book, we're following Crispin, who is a mosaicist. So think like the little glass tiles that are like inserted onto like a wall or floor or ceiling for artwork. So Crispin is a mosaicist, and he is invited by the Emperor of Sarantium, which is our world historical Constantinople, in order to place a mosaic, a really big mosaic on a domed ceiling in a very fancy cathedral that is being built by the emperor at this time. How GGK tends to set up his storytelling is to focus on the people surrounding really, really important people. So it tends to be just like the average layperson who might have access to somebody really important and not necessarily the really, really big movers and shakers themselves. The writing style is something to think about if you haven't read a GGK book before, in that it is something that is going to feel a lot different from other books. He does make use of omniscient narration and various tenses of points of perspective. There is a lot of head hopping, but it is always to a very profound effect and purpose. And so I would just say roll with the punches. Don't expect any particular head that you enter to be a permanent character forever. They absolutely might not be. Just take the book as it comes, take the writing as it comes, jot down names if you really would like that. This book has a lot to do with the idea of legacy and leaving your mark on the world and what that means to different types of people. We also talk a lot about art. If you really like artist main characters, you should read a lot of GGK's books, but this book in particular, where our main character is an artist. I haven't read these books in eons, and I don't want to take up any more time on this particular duology, but I will leave it there. But I will say that if you haven't tried GGK and you're interested, this definitely is like maybe not the best starting place, but it's not a bad starting place either. It is a really amazing duology that is just either you like will know very early on that it's not for you, or it will completely change your reading experience next year, because undoubtedly you might want to pick up some more GGK books if you love this duology. And if that's the case, hit me up in the comments down below. Come back later, or just on like any video that I happen to be having out at the time that you read it next year, and let me know, and I will guide you further on your GGK exploration. Jake Bishop also has a really great, if also really lengthy, review for the Sarantine Mosaic, so I will link that in the description down below for you to check out if you would like more information. I also want to recommend the Legends of the First Empire series by Michael J. Sullivan. This is a series that I read over the course of last year and this year, so I have had quite a bit of time to talk about this series lately. I won't spend too much time on this one. This is a prequel series sort of for Rhaeria Revelations. I personally have not read the Rhaeria Revelations, although I intend to read that series next year personally. We're following in the first book just a handful of characters, and over the course of this 6-book series, yes, 6-book series, we slowly get more and more perspectives, though they were always characters that we generally already knew. We had been already exposed to them in the eyes of our other main characters. We just add on perspectives as we go to further enrich and enhance the reading experience, to further break your heart in learning about the people who are involved in this story. And that is a story in which there are the Frey, which are these extremely long-living beings, and there are humans. There are also like goblins and giants and other things that played a much less significant role than I was expecting in the first book. If you happen to check out my review of the first book in this series, Age of Myth, so I do have a non-spoiler review for that book, and I expected that the world would build, and did, and it did in a different way than I was expecting. So the humans of this time are very, I would say like it's like very dark ages, like living in hovels, using, you know, stones for tools. They believe that the Frey are their gods. They have a treaty with them not to enter their land. They think they're gods until one of our main characters comes to accidentally sort of be involved in the killing of one of these Frey gods. From there, we follow Wraith and other perspectives as we sort of follow the events of this tumultuous event and time period as the humans begin to question their servitude sort of for these Frey overlords, as well as anticipating retaliation for the death of that Frey. We also get into the political tensions and maneuverings within the Frey realm. This is definitely a series that is about the people. As we are, as I said, slowly introduced to more and more characters, it really has to do with like who they are as people, how they contribute to this impending conflict, and the things that have shaped them, the things that make them, and how they step up and rise to the occasion. The writing is very simple and straightforward. I personally listen to the audiobooks and would extremely recommend them. They are very well done. They are very heartbreaking in that you really get to know these characters and the small little things that like shape them and make them and break them. There's also a read-along going on next year. We're reading Michael J. Sullivan's books set within this world. It is a little bit like the Realm of the Elderlings in that it is a large world where there are multiple different series set within. So I will redirect you to Jashana's channel. I'll link the read-along announcement video down below if you would like to follow along with that. I personally am going to be joining definitely for the Rhaeria Revelations and other series in this world. I might not reread these ones next year, but you know what? We'll see how the mood strikes me. So if you like to buddy read or kind of like read as part of a collective, this would be a really great series to pick up and read next year. You can also check out my wrap-ups from the months that I completed, books 1 through 6. I will link them in the description box down below, as well as the review that I did for the first book. The last series that I want to recommend is one that has just recently been completed. I did want to wait to make this video until I personally had finished reading that final book so that I could be sure of how the ending hit, but I also don't really want to hold off on releasing this video, and I can't really control when the library gives me access to that final book. And this is the Gale Song series by Shauna Lawless. The first book, The Children of Gods and Fighting Men, was my favorite book. Was one of my favorite books from the year that I read it, which I'm pretty sure was last year. If you watch my monthly reading vlog wrap-ups, you will have heard me talk about the novellas more recently, but this series is a trilogy in particular, but it's a trilogy where there are also 2 additional and not necessary novellas set within the same world that help provide a little bit more filling information and backstories on some of the relevant side characters. In our first book, The Children of Gods and Fighting Men, we follow 2 main characters, Fola and Gormla, who are women of mythological beings in Irish history. This is set in Ireland in 100 AD, and I believe is fairly historically accurate from what I have heard. So we are in a time period when Ireland had multiple sort of regional or city-state kings, as well as some Viking kings who were living and own different Irish cities at that time. And the focus in this series is not only on the conflict between these various kings, but also the conflict between the 2 mythological beings that are represented by our 2 main characters. So we have the Tuatha Dé Danann. I know that I'm not pronouncing that right. I'm so sorry. And also the Fomorians. The Fomorians are fire-wielding peoples and are down to their last 2 representatives, Gormla and her brother. And they are definitely more power-driven, selfish beings who want to take down the Tuath, or the descendants of the Tuatha Dé Danann, who have different types of magic. Our main character, Fola, is a healer, but there are also cupbearers, witches, warriors, druids, I think harpists or something maybe bards or something like that as well. So they have different types of magic, and there are a lot more of them, but they, a certain period of time ago, made the rule that they would no longer interact with mortals, and they would also keep themselves separate from mortal politics. The Fomorians, of course, have no such highbrow notions. What we get is a really interesting exploration of Fola and Gormla, as well as motherhood or mother-type relationships and being a woman in this time period. I think Fola and Gormla are both examples of really amazing, strong women who are very different women and have very different strengths, and who go about creating agency for themselves or living in this world with as much control of their own life as they can within the confines of the times and how they are treated as women. And they do so very, very differently. And I think that the author does that particular element of having 2 very distinct characters really, really well. Gormla and Fola wind up getting kind of swept up into the mortal politics between these various Irish and Viking kings, and so we explore the changing times as well as this conflict between their 2 peoples, each who want the inevitable destruction of the other. As I said, this is a trilogy, so all 3 books are currently out. The conclusion, The Land of the Living and Dead, just came out in September of this year. The author also released 2 novellas set in this world this year as well, Dreams of Fire and Dreams of Sorrow, and they're actually set chronologically well before the events of this series, but they deal with background information on some of the side characters involved. Even though both are set before the events of this series, Dreams of Sorrow is being called 2.5, and you definitely would be spoiled for a really, really impactful reveal if you read it before reading book 2. I have been thoroughly enjoying this series. I cannot wait to conclude it personally. Perhaps it would be a great series for you to pick up next year. Let me know if you have read any books in this series. I believe the Brothers Gwyn had a really good review for the first book, so I will link that in the cards above and the description box down below for you to peruse if you would like. Those are all the series that I wanted to recommend today that you could potentially binge read all the way through next year. So if you are a library reader like me, perhaps you spend a little bit of time arranging your library holds to accommodate reading some of these books next year. If you have read any of these series, I would love to hear what you think about them down below, or if you plan to read them now, please let me know. I love to hear if I have convinced somebody to pick up a favorite book of mine. And if you have a completed series recommendation that you would like to make for me, hit me up down below. Let's talk further in the comments. I will see you next time. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.